So, how many of you feel like you got the point of the question, the quiz question last time regarding does the Earth go around the sun, does the sun go around the Earth? Both, actually there are some folks that point out that both must be true for either one of them to be true, because if only the Earth goes around the sun but the sun doesn't go around the Earth, you think of that as a mirror image model, that has to happen, right? So the squirrel going around the tree, and while the philosopher is going around the tree, trying to see the squirrel, and the squirrel doesn't want to be seen by the philosopher, it's constantly going around. Who's going around who? Well, the squirrel is going around the philosopher, and the philosopher's going around the squirrel. They're both going around the tree, all sorts of ways of, that was a William James model, by the way, so that's 1901, 1902, when he wrote about that. You figure this issue has been around for that long. What's important is that I'm not suggesting that the Earth or the sun doesn't do what the other model says, saying that it's both true. They're both, well, the thing is we couldn't even really say that they're true or false, because as I think I mentioned with the camera, is the camera a camera? Yes, it's a camera. Is the camera a good camera? Our discussion broke down. We couldn't agree over it. And that is indicative of the fact that the valuative term that I introduced into the statement automatically turned that statement from a true-false statement to a value statement, which is neither true nor false. Pretty weird. You think the value statements, thou shalt not kill, ought to be considered true. That's true. You should not. But actually, that's an imperative. Thou shalt, right? So it's neither true nor false. Plus, it represents a particular ethic. A lot of people have trouble with it. It could be translated instead as thou shalt not murder. Killing is fine. But no murder. Well, what's the difference between murder and kill? Right? There's all that sort of issue. By the way, does it mean just your neighbor? You can covet someone who's down the street. And by the way, you notice that wives can covet anything they like. It's only husbands that can't covet. No, that's just weird stuff, right? You take a stick and start hitting stuff like that. You get in trouble with at least some people, I would hope. It's safe in here because, of course, in philosophy class, you're supposed to talk about all sorts of weird things. That's kind of our job. I will defend Karl Marx, at least for the day that I'm talking about Karl Marx. The next day I'll trash him. But the day that we're, this is Karl Marx and he says such and such, I'll try to be persuasive. That's part of the job. Right? But actually, Marx is dead. Didn't live that long, actually. And his poetry to his wife Jenny is terrible. If you ever get a chance, look at Marx's poetry. I'll mention it when we get the chance. But so this is really kind of an important issue when we talk about our contemporary kind of postmodern point of view, especially. It doesn't mean that we're saying that there are not truths and falses. 1 + 1 = 2. Because everyone that speaks math agrees with that, or they're not speaking math. Is there a potential world somewhere where that will be false? Could be, but it's not here right now. Right? I've puzzled over 1.5 help me with that one. Heaping teaspoons, right? 1.5 heaping teaspoons plus 1.5 heaping teaspoons. I was just adding 1.5 plus 1.5. I have no trouble. I get 3, right? Everyone agrees. But if it's a heaping teaspoon, you're going to have more than 3 teaspoons. Did I fudge with the math? Absolutely. Heaping changes it. So it's not really exactly the same question. So, and math is excellent that way. Remember, it's not an empirical science. People made it up, right? You know, there's lots of mathematicians that want to argue that numbers are real and that those relationships are real. That Fermat's last theorem was always true, even before Fermat first thought it up, before it was finally proved. What was it, just last year? It was pretty recent that someone finally proved it, right? And even then it was touch and go, because someone else thought they had a proof that proved that it was false. Did I say that right? So that's kind of interesting too. But does that mean that it's always been true? Did Einstein discover E equals mc squared? No. He invented it.
Yeah, no.
Well, I mean the formula, right?
He invented it.
I mean, he's kind of sort of famous for being the first to say energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Right? But the question is, okay, so that was kind of verified maybe, what, roughly 20 years after that? Maybe it was sooner? When the expedition on the ship noticed that, yes, the light around the sun did curve so that I think it was Mars, was in the wrong place. Or no, it was a star. It was a star that was supposed to be over here, but it looked like it was over there, which proved by point something that his theory was correct. I don't understand the whole thing, right? But, so the thing of it is, okay, so we agree today that that is a true expression of a general phenomena. But the thing is, well, wait a minute, what do we mean by that? Because strictly speaking, theories are neither true nor false, because they're interpretations of the data, right? You know, so you could find data that supports it. At the moment, it seems like you can't find data that says it is incorrect, right? So we definitely want to say that there are good theories and there are bad theories, but we want to be careful to not say that a theory, strictly speaking, is a true statement. Because theories are interpretations of the data, and only what are called categorical propositions can be true or false. So, interesting dilemma. Did Galileo, what's the deal? Who is the one that gives us gravity, Galileo or Sir Isaac Newton? What have you heard? Sir Isaac Newton? Apple. Apple's come, I don't know how Macs get into this. There's a whole Macintosh that fell. I don't know. Well, that could be just as much a rumor as anything, right? But what's the difference between Galileo's interest in gravity and Sir Isaac Newton's interest in gravity? I think it's fairly complex, actually. Part of the problem is that Aristotle was officially recognized by the church at the time of Galileo, and as a result, you had to believe everything Aristotle said. Or you could find yourself being very toasty in a very short period of time. Right? Now the thing is, one of the famous things that Galileo discovered, and thanks to the wonderful Tower of Pisa, did anybody look it up? You could actually go visit it. Can I go Google Earth? Actually, I just need maps. Pisa. And I can go to Pisa. And can't I go to the map of Pisa? Well, there's I guess I don't need to do more than that. That would be fun, though. If you go on Google Earth, you could actually go inside the tower and see how they've got all sorts of pulleys and things, counterweights, to try to help keep it from going further in the other direction. Last I heard was that the ground seems to have been shifting back, so it's actually possibly going to start coming back. But if you're a tourist there, what you can find out on the web, there's tons of these. There's all sorts of people will have someone take a selfie of them standing at a certain distance from it where they're like this. So it looks like they're, of course, trying to push or hold the tower from falling over. You get it, right? That's cute. There's plenty of those. In any case, that was leaning at the time of Galileo. He did teach at the University of Pisa. Did he actually drop stuff off of the tower? They say he did, but no one actually reports for sure. So it could be one of those, hearsay sorts of things. But he did certainly do experiments regarding gravity, dropping things. And the thing that he was trying to show was that Aristotle was wrong. Because Aristotle says things fall at different speeds depending on their weight.
It was technically true during Aristotle's time, probably. I mean, based on observations.
What? Let me go back. It was already there. I should have just grabbed it while it was here.
It's used to test spacecraft in the conditions of outer space, and it does that by pumping out the 30 tons of air in this chamber until there are about 2 grams left.
Can you hear it? Yes.
And it's got an eccentric construction for part of its history. It was built in the 1960s as a nuclear test facility to test nuclear propulsion systems, and that meant that they built it out of aluminium to make the radiation easy to do.
Aluminum.
Aluminium is not the best thing, the strongest material to build a vacuum chamber out of. So they built outer concrete skin, which is part radiation shielding and part an external pressure vessel, so that this thing can take the force that's present on the outside when it's pumped out to the conditions of outer space.
Obviously, this is
Galileo's experiment was simple. He took a heavy object and a light one and dropped them at the same time to see which fell fastest. Now in this case, the feathers fell to the ground at a slower rate than the bowling ball because of air resistance.
just clearly what Aristotle was
So
thinking.
in order to see the true nature of gravity, we have to remove the air.
Do you know that guy's name?
No, we can probably look it up.
Brian Cox.
Right.
It says it?
Yeah, Brian Cox.
Oh, thanks. I used to could be able to read.
It takes 3 hours to pump out the 800,000 cubic feet of air from the chamber.
Dropped 2 military.
Pardon?
But once it's complete, there's a near perfect vacuum inside.
61 full main, 10% full. Station 1, go for drop. PCB 30-1, pressure set point at 240 psi. Here, go for drop.
did they put it in slow-mo? Would have been a heck of a lot more convincing if they left it at full speed. Because how do I know that they didn't just slow down the bowling ball?
But I think this makes it easier to tell if they're going the same way.
They came down seconds.
Exactly.
That wasn't that long ago that it came out, this. And yet, what, 2014, they did that, or posted it, at least, on here. And I think it was when the BBC posted it in my, email. That's when I first saw that particular demonstration, which is pretty impressive. But that's essentially the argument that Galileo was trying to find, but obviously he can't remove the air from around the Tower of Pisa. So his experiment was with heavy and lighter balls. So everyone says Galileo had lots of balls, and dropped them all off of the Tower of Pisa, which makes it very dangerous if you're walking around that area. You have to make sure that they're not having philosophical arguments, because that could be dangerous. And they don't have plaques that say Galileo's balls dropped here. You know, that would have been pretty interesting, I suppose. Do I need to give you guys trigger warnings, because some of my humor could be a little on the edge there. However, okay, so it's a given that he's demonstrated that this is the case, that Aristotle was wrong, and this is bad news, because that could get everybody in trouble that believes it. But it seems like it's a simple thing. In fact, the whole question of why on earth did Aristotle make that mistake? It seemed like such an easy thing to test. How the heck could he have made that mistake? And by the way, since Aristotle was roughly 350 AD when he died, no wait, he was 68, right? And he didn't know Socrates, and Socrates died in 399. Remember, we're counting backwards. So he was a student of Plato, who lived till he was 80-something. So if we just type Aristotle, Wikipedia will instantly tell us how old and when roughly we think he died. So 384 to 322 BC, right, which is before Christ, or if they have BCE, before the Common Era, they call it, which is silly. In any case, he's the one, 322, and Galileo, we're looking at Galileo, we're looking at something. My internet broke.
Oh, your browser froze.
My browser broke?
Yeah.
1642, right? So we're looking at 1642 plus 322. Add those two together, we get 962, right? So 1009.6. Well, something like that. I was close. I lost track, but you get the idea. How come no one tested it all that time? There's some other mistakes that will be discovered too that Aristotle made that were blatantly just accepted by the world, pretty much from maybe not Aristotle's day, but the post-Aristotelians certainly accepted all of that. And so that became what everyone believed, at least in the Middle East. Then we had what was miscalled the Dark Ages in Western Europe, where Aristotle was what was lost, the Greek knowledge, not all of it, because they kept Plato, And that became the dogma of the church, especially thanks to St. Augustine and others, who codified that as the church science, which the theology was based on, right? And so you end up with Plato's philosophy, idealism, as the philosophy of the Middle Ages up until really the Crusades, when the Western Europeans went to try to get the Holy Land back, right? Because the Muslims, the Islamic horde, followers of Muhammad had swept through, and then were heading to Europe. By the way, at the time of Columbus, they were close to capturing all of Europe. So right, 1492, right? We've got Columbus sails the ocean blue, right? Easy to remember. But so while that's happening, basically, they're at the gates of Vienna, battling it out. And if Vienna fell, that would have been it. Curtains for the West, right? That's why an awful lot of folks are saying, well, the current migration of the Islamists from the Middle East because of, really global warming, when we get right down to it, all moving into Western Europe, and guess what? This is the newest invasion, a lot of people will say. Right? And they're thinking, hey, they've done this before, and we met them at Vienna with, Charles Martel, just barely eked out a victory, mostly because the Khan or the Sultan got sick and decided, oh, the heck with it, and stopped and went, oh. And so they didn't win, right? And now, the argument is now they're being invited in. By the way, some of the Islamic writers are describing it just that way as well. Suggesting to the Islamists that are in Europe and growing up there, don't try to force Islamic beliefs on everyone yet. Wait until we completely overpopulate Europe. And then you can, and then we'll change the laws and, bring everything up to our, yes. So that's not my fault. Okay. But when the monks went with the Crusades, there's a really great scene. Let me see if I can find this for you.
The world is not going to change. It's you that has to change.
Oh, wait. Wrong movie, I think. Sorry, wrong movie. Oh, Sultan? Sultan. This isn't the movie that I was looking for.
Question.
Wait, this is a really old one. Sorry. It's a much nicer, newer one. Let's see.
We found them in the Sahara.
I think new movie would get it. That's the same movie, isn't it? Yeah. Oh well.
Come, Christian.
Well, if you get the chance and you find it, there's a much better updated movie of St. Francis. In fact, fact, if you're familiar with St. Francis, his that looks like the same one, doesn't it? Well, I'll quit looking for it rather than waste time. But Francis is one of the monks that accompanies the Crusades. He gets there, of course, and ends up meeting and spending days with, was it Saladin? I think Saladin, the Sultan, right? And by the way, Saladin's counselor was Moses ben Maimon, or otherwise known as Moses Maimonides. And they say from Moses to Moses there was no one like Moses, and they mean Moses of the Ten Commandments and Moses ben Maimon as the extremes. So this is a Jewish philosopher considered by many still today to be the greatest Jewish philosopher that ever lived. And he changed the Jewish interpretation of their religion to match Aristotle's works, right? Because the science is different, right? And handed his copies of Aristotle and his own works, The Guide to the Perplexed and others, to the monks who brought them home to Europe. And I always think of this as, if you've ever seen the movie Independence Day, where Will Smith uploads from a Mac computer, a computer virus into the mothership of the aliens and blows them up, which goes to show that since that was the only time I've ever seen a Mac successfully connect with another operating system, it's not going to be good for that other operating system. That's a joke. It's fun. We never really blew up an alien mothership, just up. That never happened. It was a movie. No one's laughing. That makes me wonder, is this... same sort of thing. Gave the books of Aristotle to the monks, brought them back to Western Europe, hadn't had it for, 1,000, well, not that long, maybe, years, right? And Aristotle demonstrates that Plato is wrong in many places, right? I mean, he might have loved those who love the ideas, Plato, the idealists, right? But they're wrong, says Aristotle, right? That was his teacher. Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle, S-P-A, SPA. You could remember that connection, right? Socrates spent roughly 20 years teaching Plato before he died, and Plato spent roughly 20 years teaching Aristotle before he died. So you've got a 20-year overlap, roughly, with each of them. But so Aristotle comes into Europe, and that's roughly around 1100 AD. Takes roughly 200 years to spread all around. Remember, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have a printing press. It had to be copied by hand, right? And then gradually spread. And the people that were spreading it knew this is trouble. Because if this contradicts Plato, and Plato is the essential scientific background behind the accepted theology, right? You're going to have problems. One significant problem, for example, for Plato, the soul, the psyche, our spirit, our soul, psyche, root of psychology, yes, and all the others, psyche. Psyche is the god, right? Greek god. But she, Psyche, however you say her name, she. But if you think about it, what is your soul? For Plato, the soul was invisible, eternal, unchanging. Same as the ideas, which is why we can know things for Plato, right? By the way, it's not completely passé. We have a lot of Platonists still, for good reason, actually, because, well, we'll talk about that, right? But if you think about it, Aristotle comes along and says, stuff that doesn't have substance doesn't exist. The only things that exist have substance, and all these other characteristics, the categorical requirements, quantity, quality, etc. Right? So substance, absolutely necessary for something to exist. So if the soul has no substance, because it's invisible, has no shape, etc. Actually, the medievals thought it had a shape. They thought it was perfect, round. That's why you end up with the auras, also known as halos, around. So halo, medieval art. Is that enough? So here's one. That looks Byzantine, but that's close enough. You get the idea. The circle around the head is supposed to represent the individual's aura. And it's not just flat. It's not like a flat disc, like, you know, in the spoof that the Monty Python does, International Philosophy, right? It's not like the flapping, you know, halos that Aquinas and Augustine have on the, you know, as the referees. It's meant to be kind of a globe, but of course they don't have a way of depicting kind of a 360 image at that time. And by the way, we know that individuals, there are some who have the ability to see the auras of other people. They're unusual. I mean, relatively speaking, there's not that many. My wife is, I think, one of those. We came to a concert at the PAC once, and she said, "Ooh, that violinist has a gray, he's gray." Oh, really? Didn't look gray to me. It looked like a person. You know, and she says, "That means he's going to die before, you know, the month is out." And we're like, whoa. You know, you get the hair goes up and you think, I live with this person? You know, it's weird. By the way, the next symphony, he was dead. Still gives me the EGE, some kind of weird feeling. Yeah, that's the word. So there are people that can see these, and now we have cameras. Obviously, it's like a heat that comes from your body. And if you have a right kind of camera, some sort of infrared or something of that sort, yes, you can see the heat around there. So the people that have been seeing that were not crazy. You know, we know that some people's sensory perceptions of things are broader than others, and so on. There's certainly things we can't hear, but that are out there, you know, if you have the right microphones to pick it up. Giraffes. When I was a kid, giraffes were mute. They never talk. That was weird. Animals that never said anything. Well, dumb us, right? Now we know that they talk all the time. They never shut up, actually. But you have to have the right audio pickup in order to hear them, because their voice is at a pitch that we cannot hear. But they can hear one another. And of course, they're giraffes are famous for peeking over fences, because they have long necks. So, do I have too many jokes? The trouble is the jokes aren't funny. That's the problem. Oh well. In any case, so Aristotle, his works are brought back to Europe, and over the space of roughly 200 years, it spreads and it creates basically a panic, a revolution among the monks, right? Because these are the educated people. They're also the ones that are the theologians, right? And they're the ones that themselves get into arguments over this. You have Aristotelians and Platonists on both sides, right? And so the church literally is in turmoil, and they're all fascinated because the stuff is good. Everyone loves Aristotle. In fact, they begin referring to him as the philosopher. Right? So they don't think of all the others as philosophers, they think of Aristotle as the philosopher. So if we go to something like, pick a topic, let's see, well, God, I guess, existence, why not? So this is Summa Theologica, it's Aquinas. So this is 13 plus AD. This is after Aristotle has been introduced, caused all this dilemma. The Pope says, okay, we've got to either get rid of Aristotle or figure out how to make Aristotle fit our dogma. And Thomas, you do it. So yes. Thomas goes and he sits down, well actually he stood probably, and dictated to a group of writers the Summa Theologica, which is the summation of all theology. So if you have any theological questions, just go to the Summa Theologica and plug in the question, and chances are the answer's there, both sides, right? If you have arguments with Gentiles, you could go to his Summae Contra Gentiles, which is his summation of all the arguments against those that are Gentiles. Right? But so here we go. All of the articles are set up this way. So for example, you get the proposition. So in this case, the question is the existence of God. Is the proposition God exists self-evident? Is it demonstrable? Does God exist? So Article 1, whether the existence of God is self-evident. First we get objections. Objections. It seems that the existence of God is self-evident. Now those things are said to be self-evident to us, the knowledge of which is naturally implanted in us, as we can see in regard to the first principles. But as Jamison says from the Fide so that's the Orthodox faith, the knowledge of God is naturally implanted in all, therefore the existence of God is self-evident. Objection 2. Further, those things are said to be self-evident which are known, as soon as the terms are known, which the philosopher, right? So there you go, right? The philosopher from the posterior analytics, right, is there, says is true, the first principles of demonstration, etc. So you have to deal with the philosopher who, if you click on it, you can see is Aristotelos. Aristo means best, telos, purpose, or design, or order. So this is the guy that gives us the best explanation of everything. That's weird, isn't it? His name literally means what he does. That's kind of scary, because I don't know which came first. The name, is it a name? Aristotle. Or did he do this stuff and someone says, let's call him Aristotle, because that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. No, I don't know. There's a PhD waiting for some of you here who want to check that, if you're interested. Okay, so Aristotle's works criticize Plato for lots of reasons, because if your soul is invisible, it doesn't exist. As far as Aristotle's concerned, only things that have substance exist. And guess what? According to the Augustinian theology, the whole point of the church, it still is very relevant today. The Pope, I'm thinking Pope John Paul II years ago, went and gave a speech in the Philippines, and millions of people are there, and he says, you know, the best thing for you to do is to enjoy your life as it is. Don't worry about, you know, all this stuff, etc., etc. Or all sorts of folks in the press that were absolutely horrified. How could he be encouraging people to just put up with life as it is? They're not realizing that the Catholic theology actually encourages that, because the most important part of you is your soul. right? You're not worried about your body. In fact, most of the tradition, when I was in California visiting the missions that Father Sierra set up, in the one that still had his cell, right? The monks' rooms were called a cell, which Leeuwenhoek, by the way, when he saw Cork and he saw the arrangement of the empty cells, that he got the idea of calling that a cell because it looked like a monk's cell. So the reason we call these cells is because of the monks' cells in a monastery. Weird. In any case, I went in and I saw his room. His whip was still there on the shelf on the wall. Right? You know, I mean, some of that sounds, terrible, but monks would beat themselves because you've got to get that body into submission. Because what does the body want to do? It wants to have pleasure. It wants to be sinful. It wants to do all this kind of stuff. And that's all bad for your soul. Why? Because your soul is invisible and not attached to the physical. And the more your body, which is physical, draws the soul down to enjoy the physical, the less pure your soul is to continue living eventually in heaven, which is also invisible. Right? It's with the ideas again. Right? Very Platonic. Right? So the church still has this Augustinian attitude that the soul is the most important part. We shouldn't be enjoying ourselves. That's bad for you. Okay, you've got to get married, Paul tells us. Geez, but don't enjoy it. You got to have children, but don't have fun doing it. Just make them quick and get over it. St. Paul, right? Because the soul is the important part. You don't want to screw up the soul by enjoying yourself too much. That's just a brief look at some of the conflict, right? Well, but Aristotle says the soul doesn't exist if it doesn't have physical substance, which means it would be corrupted. How does Aristotle explain the soul? The soul is the activity of the body. So you need the body, and it's the activity of the body. That's the soul for Aristotle. Could be very persuasive, but if it is, that means that your reward for being a good person, for having a good soul, has to accompany a body. The body has to enjoy it too. So the church changes its attitude about going to heaven. It's not just the soul. The body has to resurrect. There's all kinds of problems there. Do you get a new body? Do you get an old one? When's the right time for the body to be resurrected? I mean, Paul had to face some of these questions in his letters, if you're familiar with that, right? So this is a conflict that the church had to deal with way back with Paul, even. He's writing to people saying, when Jesus comes back, we're all going to be saved, etc. Well, Joe just died, and he was saved. What happens? Well, when Jesus gets back, Joe will resurrect, says Paul. Oh crap, that sounds horrible. Have you ever seen a dead body? They look awful. Can you imagine? Yes, we can. This is, the zombies, brains. Right? That's what the Greeks would think. All these zombies are going to come up out of the grave. That sounds awful. Paul reassures, no, don't worry. They'll be heavenly bodies. They'll be beautiful. Everything will be all fixed. Weird, right? So that stuff takes place obviously around 80 AD when those letters are written. Or thereabouts, right? Not really sure when Paul would have written that. John's gospel is 80 AD. That's considered like the last one. And Paul's letters would have been the first. So maybe it was closer to 50 AD, you think? Well, in any case, you can look it up. There are people that argue over that too. So obviously we have all sorts of problems with Aristotle. One of them is this, when stuff falls, if it's heavier, which by the way, remember, we're talking in English here, but all these conversations are happening in Latin or in Greek, right? Gravitas is Latin for heaviness, right? If something is important, it could also be gravitas, right? It means both of those things, right? So gravity is literally, it's gravitas, it's heaviness, right? But at the same time, if I have two balls, one is like a bowling ball, and the other one is like a tennis ball. For Aristotle, if I drop the two of them together, right, the bowling ball should hit the ground first, and the tennis ball afterwards, right? But with those, I can almost guarantee you they'd be simultaneous when they hit. Right, no problem, right? Aristotle should have checked. I don't know what the heck he's thinking, right? But remember when we look up Aristotle, he really tried to do everything. So for example, this is his Nicomachean Ethics, but let me just go up to browse and pick Aristotle. Ah, okay, so I've got them right here. You see? Big enough? So I'll just cursor down this to give you an idea of the works that we have, that we haven't lost, by Aristotle. The Athenian Constitution, Categoriae, on dreams, on the gait of animals, how they walk, right? On generation and corruption, on the heavens, the history of animals, on interpretation, longevity and shortness of life, on memory and reminiscence, metaphysics, meteorology, on the motion of animals, Nicomachean Ethics, on the parts of animals, physics, which is nature, poetics, politics, posterior analytics, prior analytics. Those are all part of the organon, the tool, which is also called logic. On prophesizing by dreams, rhetoric, on sense and the sensible, on sleep and sleeplessness, on sophistical refutations. A lot of the sophists' arguments were not very logical. By the way, since Aristotle was the one that invented logic, it was pretty easy for the precursors of Aristotle's thought not to follow his logic. So, on the soul topics, virtues and vices, on youth and old age, and on life and death, on breathing. So those are the ones at least that are there. I'm not sure if that's complete. It might be, but even so, we know that we've lost some. There's a lot out there that people refer to, for example, in their writings that they've read that we no longer have. Right? So that's pretty guaranteed. Right? So he's trying to cover a lot of material. His student, his most famous student, was Alexander the Great. Yeah. And we know during the time that Alexander was off having a war, trying to conquer the world, he had roughly 2,000 men engaged in sending stuff back to Aristotle, his teacher, in Athens, at the Lyceum, which was where the school was that Aristotle was using. You imagine elephants, and plants, things that he thought his teacher would find interesting. Kind of like a zoo, being gathered, and they're basically creating a encyclopedia of sorts, in order to just keep record of all knowledge, right? Assuming they were finding everything. And that makes sense because according to the categories, all knowledge is knowledge of statements that are true or false. Am I driving you crazy, or is this okay? This is good? Okay. So, additional square of opposition. So this is from Aristotle's Logic, and it gives us, these are kind of the basics here. He actually does grammar, he explains parts of speech, words, subject, sentence, structure, all of that. But once you get up to full statements, then it says there are 4 statement types that can be true or false. Every SSP, all SSP, however you want to put it. No SSP, some SSP, some S is not P. Of course, get this in logic, right? Universal affirmative, universal negative, particular affirmative, some S is P, particular negative, some S is not P, right? So any statement you make that could be true or false will either be one of these 4 types or a combination of 2 or more of them. That's pretty straightforward today. You might have some puzzlement over things like proper nouns. So all Hillary Clintons, we don't say that, we just say Hillary Clinton. Is that an A statement or is that an I statement? Usually it would be an A statement because when you're talking about a proper noun, you're talking about all the members of the set. There's only one. And we're talking about all of her. Right? When we say Hillary Clinton ran for president. And the second part would be the predicate, which would be the P, right? So S is subject, P is predicate, right? So all true or false statements have to be like that. And you can tell that they're true or false because you look at the subject set, and if what you say about it is true, then it's in the predicate, then it's a true statement. If it turns out no, so all dogs are cats. No, that's false, right? Yeah? So you can tell it's true or false because you know what the sets are, right? And so all we have to do to know everything is to describe what everything belongs to, all of its characteristics, all of its sets. And that's essentially what that whole operation was. By the way, Plato had nothing like that, right? So that's fun. So Plato is absolutely impressive, really good stuff, and the church realizes it and absorbs it. But at the same time, the Pope realizes this is a problem. So remember, he gives Aquinas the job, reconcile this. And he basically does by out-Platoing Plato and out-Aristotling Aristotle. And essentially what he's accomplished there is to say that both of them are right. Both philosophies are right, right? It depends on how you're talking, the context of what you're saying. In some contexts, this is the right way to interpret it, but in other contexts, this is the right way. And as long as you get the context right, you'll realize that you're saying the right thing. And you can see that both philosophies are true, right? And he also adds, they say he doubles our ontology. Ontology, ontos is thing, and logos is the study of. So ontology is the study of what there is, which is actually the title of one of Willard Van Orman Quine's famous books on what there is. You have some Quine, I think. You've shown pictures of Quine books on your Facebook page. By the way, you're welcome to friend me on Facebook. Fabulous tool, I love it. But in any case, so on what there is ontology, right? Studying what there is. And Aquinas doubled it by saying that there are existences, which are the substances that Aristotle is talking about. Everything that exists has to have substance. But there are also essences. And essences are what Plato is talking about. And so everything has both existence and essence. It might just have essence if it doesn't exist. So unicorns. We would recognize a unicorn if we saw one, but as a matter of fact, there are no presently existing unicorns. But we would know what the essence of that is. By the way, it's pretty easy to do this kind of Aquinas thing with us because we actually speak Aquinas's philosophies in our everyday common sense. We're inheritors of that. Aquinas had that impact. Remember, this is 13 something, right? The Aquinas does this for us. Right? So it's reconciled. But there are problems with it, especially with the math. And some of that is not going to fly, especially the astronomy. With astronomy, you look at Aristotle and the Ptolemaic system comes after Aristotle, but it's based on what Aristotle says. So for Ptolemy, everything is based on the concept that the sun goes around the earth. The earth, terra firma. Yeah, terra is earth, right? Firma, firm, right? So this doesn't move. You know, and we can see if we go and look at my link here, the Copernicus. So this is this is before Galileo, and as you can see, before he even publishes this, and by the way, it actually didn't get published till he was dead. He wanted to be absolutely sure. He didn't want to discover that there was a stake out there with Copernicus, named a stake for Copernicus. Not interested in doing that. So the book didn't actually get published till after he was dead, as far as I know. But notice this introduction to it was written in time. And then there are two friends, I think, that added to it. So this person, Osiander, have some politicians in town, I think, named Osiander, or teachers, I forget. So this is, please don't go crazy thinking that he's crazy, and don't burn him at the stake because you think this is absolutely heretical. The same thing Schoenberg will also say. And then you get Copernicus's preface himself to the Pope at the time, Paul III. I can readily imagine, this is, if you want to try to avoid getting in trouble, right, this is the way to do it. Plus the fact that he died before even this happened, right? Therefore, I debated with myself for a long time whether to publish the volume, etc. However, Your Holiness will perhaps not be greatly surprised that I have dared to publish my studies after devoting so much effort to working on them, etc. So some think that the earth remains at rest. There are some ancients, though. Philolaus, the Pythagorean, believes that, like the sun and moon, and this is confusing, it revolves around the fire. What the heck is that all about? With the sun going around the fire? What are they talking about? That's weird. Heraclides of Pontus, etc. So, he's been reading stuff, finding other goofballs out there that thought the earth might move, which is clearly, how much common sense do you need to see this isn't moving? Silly person, right? So, but he goes on. By the way, notice that his system is still wrong because he still believes that everything has to be circular. So his measurements actually aren't very accurate when you compare it to the Ptolemaic system, which using epicycles became very close, right? But read through this, it's absolutely hilarious. And notice it's free. I didn't have to put a quarter in the screen. It came right up. This is a weird site, though. I tried finding out what else they might have, and it's just, you could buy calendars from them. I don't know if I'm interested in calendars. Galileo, it gets really serious now. And you could go and look at the systems of the world, which is the dialogue that really, do you say that the fit hit the Sean? How would you say that, right? Shit hit the fan?
Yeah.
You could say fit hit the Sean, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Either way, it's a mess, right? And that's where this book really was an eye-opener. This is a whole biography, so it starts off as a kid. It talks about his father, his family, his father being a musician, and and the arguments that they were having over music, which is also an Aristotelian problem, because Aristotle covers music. And guess what? When you're arguing over how music should be, they were all in agreement on the octave, really. By the way, it was Bach that really gave us the kind of formal music structure that we use today in his something clavier. What was it called? Anybody remember offhand? The well-tempered clavier. It was. Well-tempered clavier. Google knows what I'm thinking, or BMV is the work, so that's not a year. But this, I think, is the work that basically defined what became modern music notation and how you tune things, because at the time of Vincenzo, whatever Galileo's father's name, he was arguing over the way a guitar should be tuned, so that the music could be played a certain way. And if you think about it, this is not just a matter of, well, look at a sitar, right? A sitar from India, they have strings that play 12 pitches in between the notes in our typical octave, right? You know, who's right or who's wrong? That would be dumb. Today, of course, if we say that there's lots of different theories, each theory is a tool that enables you to do certain things, so you wouldn't say that a sitar is an illegal instrument, has too many notes. That would be just weird, right? That's like saying you're not allowed to speak French. It's verboten. Oh, that would hurt, wouldn't it? Oh, sorry. You know, French, German, they don't, well, they have a history. Sorry about that. How am I doing on time? Good? I have fun. Do you realize that? So if I go off on a tangent, it's because I'm just absolutely thrilled with this. And I'm going to follow this merrily down a little path, wherever it goes. Okay. Well, we are in trouble because Galileo is demonstrating that Aristotle is wrong on several points. And if you're talking about the way he describes motion in, well, I can think of we would go English, right? The motu. This is referred to as DE space M-O-T-U, right? M-O-T-U of motion. And if this is wrong, how much else is Aristotle is wrong? And when we start applying what Galileo discovers to the motion of the planets, in comes another dilemma, because by now he's read about this marvelous device. Either he's read about it or he's heard about it. There was a device invented, I think a Dutch lens grinder, created a scope that could be used by military commanders to see the guy far away, right? If you saw Robin Hood, and you saw the first time he looked at a telescope, he immediately went to pull out his sword because he thought the guy was riding right up close. Dumb movie, right? But you get the idea, right? Whoa, now you can see far, right? Galileo figured out himself how to make his own based on what he had read. And the end result of that was that his were better than the others, And he used them to look at the stars. And of course, one of the first things he discovers is the moon. Isn't perfect. Right, I bet you I could just do this. Okay, so Galileo draws what he sees with his telescope and discovers that the moon has mountains and other things that might be lakes and things. Who knows what these are, right? By the way, that's totally wrong. Everything in the heavens should be perfect. Yeah, right? All sorts of things are, all part of this package. You think of the different kinds of things you would go to study in the university, right? You have, first you have grammar, then you have logic, then you have rhetoric, then you have arithmetic, then you have astronomy, and then music, right? And then, no, I'm getting them mixed up, but 3 and 4, right? The trivium and the quadrivium, and they go up. So the trivium, what? I want the trivium. That just means 3, so that's, university. Is there a university called trivium? Oh, okay. So this is the lower division of the 7 liberal arts, and that's grammar, dialectic or logic, and rhetoric, right? And if you go to the quadrivium, which is the next, then we get, what are they? Shoot, where did they go? Ah, here they are. So in order, arithmetic, geometry, that's the one I was missing, astronomy, and then music. So, wow, how do you figure that? Well, notice they're more and more abstract. Right? And astronomy is physical, as you can see the stars. Music is invisible, but absolutely the highest of the sciences, right? And remember, if you're listening to church music at the time, absolutely gorgeous stuff. The Gregorian chant. Gregorian Pope Gregory. So he codified the chant. This is the official chant that you could use in the church for the various services, etc. Right? So you get the idea. Things going up, as you get up farther, they have to be more and more perfect. Everything is in a complete chain of being, according to this theory. Hierarchy. Right? Everything was conceived of fitting in its place. God at the top, hell at the bottom, and everything in between in its place, and everything was next to everything. There are no gaps. Right? Everything, great chain of being. And as you go up, everything becomes more and more perfect. Angels and the spheres, music of the spheres, and then you keep going. Everything has to be perfect up there. So discovering that there was stuff on the moon that made it look very Earth-like, whoa, that is, he literally had cardinals looking through the telescope, seeing it for themselves and denying it. No, it can't be. It cannot be. Cannot be, right? There it is, right? And then, so, there it is, right? Then he turns his telescope on to Venus. And if we look at this becomes, by the way, the significant argument does it work? We've got the design right here. I wish it showed the whole thing, but there's like, if you map out Venus and you have it either going around the sun or going around in orbit around the Earth, right? And you look at the various phases of Venus, which he could now see with his telescope, that demonstrated that, just because of the math, the physics, that Venus had to be going around the sun, not around the Earth. Right? Now, does this prove that the Earth goes around the sun instead of the sun going around the Earth? Actually, no. And in fact, you can go and look at the Tychonic model. Tycho Brahe, right? He's involved in this. He's going to be trying to figure out a way to keep the church dogma intact and yet account for these new discoveries. And what he gives us is the Tychonic model, which is essentially the mirror reverse image of the heliocentric model. Right? So now it still has the Earth in the center, and then you have the moon going around the Earth. No disagreement on that whatsoever, right? But then you have the sun going around the Earth, and then you have all the other planets going around the sun. So you see how that would work, right? That keeps the Earth still. Now, Aristotle thought the Earth rotated in space. It was in the center, but it rotated. Galileo argues for three types of motions. The rotation, that gives us day and night. And then the movement around the Earth, around the sun, right? That gives us what does it give us? Well, it gives us the calendar year, right? But then he also argued that the tilt of the Earth changed, which is pretty close, right? It does, right? So it's not that it changes, it stays the same actually, but as it moves around, right, that tilt, obviously here, we're not seeing very much sunlight right now because we're tilted away from the sun, but when we come back towards the solar or summer equinox or whatever, right, we're then going to be able to be facing the sun much more. Barrow won't see night, right, for that time period. Right? So Galileo argues for this, but he does this in the the dialogues of two systems, which is this piece here. I have to quit. What time it is? Are we okay?
It's 2:13.
So I've got 2 whole minutes. I didn't give a quiz question yet. Do we have 2 minutes or 25? Okay. I need a good quiz question. Did I already give one? No. How about this?
Chlorella is absolutely one of my favorite. This is matcha green tea. That's not chlorella. Chlorella, this is ashwagandha.
This is totally contrary to Pope Gregory's, but it's based on Pope Gregory. So the problem is that there's a musical instrument accompanying this. The Gregorian chant was meant to be only human voices. Musical instruments were not introduced until Bach, that time period, and was Protestant. And this is just absolutely crazy for me. The Protestants were against having too much pleasure in life. So they were against icons, right? So they whitewashed everything, got rid of the statues, all that stuff. They changed the church, threw out all that stuff because it was too much pleasure in that stuff. It was too sensual. And what did they do? They added musical instruments to the allowed music in the church, which is totally the opposite because that made it incredibly sensual. Right? It just feels so good to listen to. I mean, with the human voices and everything. Oh, it's just absolutely gorgeous, right? Catholic Church, on the other hand, was just, human voices only, because we could make it so that there's... Actually, this isn't really very good even ahead. Let's see if I can find something a little bit less about this. So notice it's not the kind of music you hear, some boys kiss me, some boys hug me, I think they're okay, yay. If they give me proper credit, I don't turn away, yay. Because we are living in a material world, and I'm a material girl. A version of Madonna. One of these days I'm going to do it with, pasties. Would be awful. But there's differences, musical differences. This is meant to be flowing. Well, listen. So here's the question. What do you think of Gregorian chant? Is that fair? Questions? You can come in. I'm finishing up. Any questions, though? You guys having fun? Just anything like what you'd expect? I can change. By the way, we do have a philosophy department. We have a space. So the admin building on the second floor, people are welcome.
Way in the back, just so you guys know, way in the back.
We have books up there that you can. It's kind of a lending library, but actually you don't have any checkout process. You just borrow them. Bring them back if you feel like it. Also a great place for you to dump books you no longer want. See you Tuesday.